Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Distinguishing the Right Roadmap to Drive Industry-Wide Decarbonisation. This webinar is brought to you by Greenship Technology and Shipping 2030. My name is Dita Kelsey and I will be your moderator today. In a moment, I will be turning things over to our speakers, but first, let me explain how you can get the most out of this event. To improve your viewing and listening experience, you can move your webcast windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize them by clicking on their lower right corner. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find multiple application widgets. A copy of today's slide deck is also available in the green resource list widget. We welcome questions about our topic and will answer as many as we can following the presentation, but feel free to submit yours to the queue at any time. Just type it into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen and hit the submit button. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You will be notified by email when the archive is available. Now, let me introduce today's presenters. We have Diane Gilpin, founder and CEO from the Smart Green Shipping Alliance, and we have Gavin Allwright, secretary for the International Windship Association. You can find more information about our speakers by clicking on the speaker bio widget at the bottom of your screen. With that, let's get started. Gavin and Diane, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning. I'm Diane Gilpin and I designed and lead the Smart Green Shipping Alliance. It's a collaborative industry initiative that's addressing the challenges and opportunities that are raised by shipping's urgent need to decarbonise. So what we've been doing is working across industries within shipping, outside shipping, with NGOs, with government, with large industries, with small businesses, to try and co-create solutions that will be technically and commercially superior as we go into an uncertain future. So that's me. I wonder, Gavin, do you want to do a short intro and then we'll start to tackle the questions?
Absolutely, yes. So my name is, thank you, Di. My name is Gavin Allwright. I'm the Secretary General of the International Windship Association, which is a member-driven association with over 50 members providing wind propulsion technology solutions to the market. And we have also an extensive supporter and wider network as well from every group from academia through to research and development, media, etc. And obviously the decarbonisation agenda is something of critical importance to technology providers of low carbon technologies, of course, but also to the wider market where many of these solutions and technologies need to be focused on in quite a holistic way. So hybrid systems, not a one-size-fits-all solution in these coming troubled years. So Di, do you want to take a stab at the 2050 vision header here?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, 2050. You know, my background is in innovation, and the bigger the challenge, the bigger the opportunity, as far as I see it. And I know that sounds a little bit trite, but it's absolutely critical that we address this challenge. I don't think it's possible for anybody to have read last week's International Panel on Climate Change report and come away thinking, oh, I know what we'll do, we'll just wait and see what happens. That report distinctly says we have 12 years left before we are facing climate breakdown. And climate breakdown will impact every single one of us and every single one of our businesses. And so it's not really an option to wait and see any longer. It hasn't been an option to wait and see for a long time, but we have done that. So I think what we want to be thinking about is how do we go to the next step? We kind of reach out to 2050, and that seems terribly challenging and difficult, and we don't know what the world will look like at all in 2050. So I think the best way to approach 2050 is to look at, you know, what we're going to do in November 2018, so that we can start to put a plan in place. And to that end, I think we need to be figuring out what we can do today, what we can do in the medium term, and what we can do in the long term. And one of the key aspects that both Gavin and I are interested in is wind propulsion, and that's because we have several thousand years of experience of moving ships, boats through the water using wind, and people seem to think that that's going back to the future, and to some extent it is, and that's okay. But what we really need to address is that we're talking about the energy, we're talking about the propulsion. So if you look at a Dutch windmill, 18th, 17th century windmill, that was using wind propulsion, but the technology that was used to harness it was wholly different to that which we are using now. And I had the great good fortune to work in a renewable energy company, and we put up the first wind turbine in Ireland in amidst a really, really short period of time. What we've been able to develop by working together across industries is a staggering development around the tech. And so now we're harnessing that same energy that was powering the Dutch windmills and powering thousands and thousands of homes with it. So I think we mustn't be timid, we must be bold. I think we must be visionary. And I think we must start the journey, because when you start something, all manner of things start to move into place. And I think that's really very important when we're thinking about 2050. Start now.
Yeah, I would completely concur with you there, Diane. I think you picked up on that. How will we use that carbon budget? What channels? I've been very heartened. When we see these pessimistic reports, it can be very demotivating sometimes, thinking, well, what options do I have? What can I do? And I've been very heartened over the last 12 months, and especially since April, when the IMO passed or adopted its initial strategy, that these technologies are starting to line up, and actually pathways, we're starting to see those pathways to ultra low carbon, and even those possible carbon neutral and zero emissions fleets that we all hope will be there in the future. And I think, one thing I would like to say before we move on to the nuts and bolts is that, the decision in April 2018 to adopt that initial strategy with the caveat of at least 50% of carbon emissions reduction by 2050 was a dramatic step for the IMO and the industry collectively to take. So I think we should applaud that, and the fact that it's an industry-wide decision was quite groundbreaking, because we're not seeing that in the other industries that need to be making those moves. So, so I'd just like to put that as a baseline for moving forward.
All right, Diane, Gavin, thank you very much for that introduction. Just a question that I've got, and this is kind of more of an outside perspective, but so much of what we talk about when it comes to decarbonisation is led by Europe, by Scandinavia, but how does the supply kind of on a global scale? When you look at wind energy, if we take that as an example, in America, we're just seeing the first set of wind turbines installed and kind of really going as projects there. So what are your thoughts in terms of global uptake and commitment towards this decarbonisation vision going forward?
Gavin, do you want to start on that? Your international.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, I think Europe has been a driver. However, we are seeing strong commitments from maybe from more of the state level. For example, California is really pushing the environmental agenda there, and although wind energy hasn't had such a large uptake in the States, solar energy has been seen a dramatic increase there. But I think they are leading, especially in things like policy and consumer green technology uptake. So I feel that there is, on a case-by-case basis in the States, there's movement there. Asia is certainly waking up, and that's a huge area, but they're certainly waking up to the renewable energy revolution, where we're seeing massive strides in China, in India, and those areas now are also looking towards their shipping fleets in a very systematic way. Actually, I'm going to a conference in Bangladesh in a few days' time, specifically talking about sustainable shipping in developing countries. And while there are some huge challenges there, especially on the finance aspect, there's also the opportunity to really leapfrog in technology. I mean, we saw this in for example, in the phone telecommunications area, where Africa basically leapfrogged into the mobile digital world, and that can have some dramatic advantages for the first takers or the first adopters in those areas. So while it's patchy, I think that there is going to be, over the next couple of years, as we see fuel prices rise, I think there will be a significant uptake there. Di, I mean, is that your impression of that sort of worldwide spread of how can I say, renewable energy perception or uptake?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about decarbonisation, we need to be thinking about what's working and what's not working. And you're absolutely right. The uptake of renewable energy in the world is growing faster than fossil energy, or certainly faster than coal. So there is a transition afoot, and as an entrepreneur and an innovator, I don't think it's my job to worry about whether other people have got with the program, because having worked on the launch of cellular telephones, when we started out, everyone went, "Oh no, we don't want a phone. We don't want a phone that we move. We got one on my desk. Why would I need one that I walked about with?" And now we can see that the phone isn't something that we make telephone calls with, as much as do our banking and talk to our family, and we just do a million computery things on a phone, which everyone said wouldn't work. So there is an uptake. There's a significant uptake of renewables in South America, and as Gavin said, in Asia. And so I think what we're looking at is to rethink our mindset. It was said to me the other day that we should not be thinking outside of the box, but think as if there is no box. But what I mean by that is that the fossil fuel age hasn't been that long in terms of the age of the planet. So the planet's been around for millennia. our species has survived without fossil fuels, and not to the level of quality of living that we have today, obviously. But I see it as a massive opportunity, a great challenge. How do we figure that out? I mean, we're clever species. We've got masses of computing power that we didn't have 150 years ago when fossil fuels started to emerge into our world. You know, one of the things that fascinates me is there was a ship called the Flying Cloud, a wind-powered sailing vessel, and she was built specifically in response to the need to get materials and supplies from New York to San Francisco in response to the gold rush. And that ship was set the fastest sailing record and held it for 109 years. And why and how could a ship be so fast and hold the record for 100 years? Well, you know, I think there are two parts to that. The first is that the Flying Cloud, unusually for the time, was navigated by a woman. So obviously she was going to be sailed very fast and very efficiently. But secondly, what happened after the Flying Cloud's emergence onto the shipping market was the introduction of fossil fuels, of coal. So innovation moved into this new energy source, and it was very successful, and I think it's great. I don't have any issues around it, but what I think we will be able to see, particularly in the development of wind, but in other sorts of technology, is that all of the pent-up creativity that we've been hanging on to for 150 years can emerge. And what we will imagine going into the future is, you know, sailing ships, cargo ships are going to look as much like the Cutty Sark as a Tesla looks like a Model T Ford. I mean, we're not going backwards, we're going forwards. We're using 21st century solutions. We're looking at automation. We're looking at lightweighting. We're looking at novel materials. We're looking at digital routing. There's all sorts of marvelous things that we can call upon to solve the problem. And so I think we need to remember that our experience of the present shouldn't be defining how we see the future. I think we need to be much more open-minded, and we need to recognize that as a species, we are good at survival. And it's important that we recognize that the challenge that the IPCC has laid down for everybody is that we are trying to survive as a species. And so we will bring to bear all of our knowledge, creativity, ability to relate to one another and relate to and learn from other species on how to operate successfully in the world that we're creating. So decarbonisation, global uptake, there isn't a border that greenhouse gas emissions recognise. They don't recognise that you get to the end of the UK and that's it. They are present across the world, and we in the developed world have created the majority of greenhouse gas emissions. We have a responsibility in the developed world to move forward as fast and as quickly and as efficiently as we can to minimise the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we continue to pump into the atmosphere. We have the capability, we have the technologies, and our task is to go to work, and to go to work soon. And I think, you know, Gavin's view and experience with projects like the Smart Green Shipping Alliance and others around the world is that there is an upsurge in creativity, and we will make a difference in how we globally decarbonize, even if we just do it in our own little way. It's like something that can be An infection in a good way, viral in a good way, because what we're developing are technically and commercially better systems. It'll take a while to get there, but what we can see from the wind energy sector is that power being produced by offshore wind turbines is cheaper than that's being produced by coal, and in the end that will make the big difference. So I think we all have a responsibility. It's inappropriate to point at other people and say they're not doing anything, so we shouldn't. I think we should do it because it's better for our businesses, and that's why we've managed to get a bunch of people involved in our, a bunch of really important and powerful people involved in our project. So I think Gavin probably has lots of other stories. I don't know how able you are to tell about successes and initiatives that are emerging all over the world around wind, but also around other decarbonisation programs.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on what you said there, Di, because it really is. My feeling is that we're entering into a period to continue the wind analogy and into a perfect storm. We have policy which is underscoring the need to move. We've got the price which is increasing, and I think the sulfur cap coming in will see significant addition to that, along with potential CO2 or carbon rises. We've seen already in the ETS program this year the cost of carbon going up from $7 to $20, with projections possibly up to $100 per ton by 2020. And that's significant when that's $300 plus per ton of fuel. And perception. What Diane was saying there about, it is an exciting time to be in the industry. I see a generational shift among the leaders in the industry as well. But most of the ship owners, most of the people in charge of the companies on the boards of directors now get it. They get that there's an environmental challenge. They get that they need to find a pathway to making profits, but profits that their shareholders are keen to see that are green or greening in their way forward. But also there's a huge influx of young, talented designers, people from outside of the industry viewing shipping as an exciting area of change and of transition. And we're seeing people coming in with some quite interesting disruptive ideas of how we can maybe go forward with this. And I think that trend is only going to increase over the next few years. So, with that policy sort of price people combination, I think that we're entering into an incredibly exciting period of change, but also one that probably the challenge is not the change, but how to maintain that profitability within that period of change. But I concur with Di completely that all I see is opportunities. I really cannot see this as the crushing challenge that some people will portray this as. It's opening up some incredible avenues, development in alternative fuels, propulsion, energy saving and energy transition technologies, and so on and so on. So I feel that we're in the right industry. We've got the right tools. It's how do we get these onto the vessels into that borderless industry that we have. So carbon is borderless, emissions are borderless, our industry is borderless as well. And I think in that sense, we should have the right mindset to take on that internationalist challenge. So Di,
thank you, Gavin. I think borderless was the word that I was struggling for. So very many thanks for that. I'm inspired by what you say to share an experience that I was very privileged to be part of yesterday The Department for Transport in the UK launched the Clean Maritime Council, which is a collaborative effort to develop a zero-emission shipping policy for the UK. And the reason that around the table there were NGOs, there were big businesses, there were small businesses like us, there were policy experts and shipyards and financiers, and the energy and the enthusiasm just echoed what Gavin said. You know, this is a great opportunity. There are fantastic opportunities in this. And one of the most notable presentations was from the Ferguson shipyard on the Clyde. And the CEO came from the aerospace industry because he thought shipping was more exciting. He thought there were more opportunities in shipping. And what Ferguson's have produced is the first ever hybrid ferry. They have built an LNG vessel, and they're working on hydrogen powered ships. And their energy, their enthusiasm, and their belief that they are onto a commercially attractive runway is very, very heartening to see. And I think what we're looking at with the Clean Maritime Council is the recognition at a government level that there are big export opportunities for countries that lead the way in this decarbonisation challenge. We can see the Scandinavians surging ahead, and the UK is determined to take a slice of the pie, if you like. We've got multiple opportunities. That you know, decarbonisation isn't one size fits all. So I think there's enough scope for different segments of the market to be addressed by different initiatives. But I think that the really important message is that zero emissions represents a commercial opportunity, and significant parts of the industry are coming together to figure out in a system solution type of way how we do that. So I come out of that meeting feeling encouraged, feeling inspired. There's a lot of work to do, but that has never been the problem. I think we were all used to working hard in this industry. It's incredibly 24-hour borderless industry. So working hard isn't the challenge. I think changing our minds to believe that we have great opportunities ahead of us is probably the biggest obstacle that we have in our way. But that is certainly shifting, and I definitely feel that we've got that mindset emerging across the sector. And the truth is, if you don't get to be part of it, then you don't get to be part of a sustainable, in all sense of the word, industry. You know, we need to be sustainable. We need to be able to make money, and you ain't going to be able to make too much money if there is in 12 years no market left. So I think that's the driver that's keeping us all focused. And I don't know whether that really maps into your experience, Gavin. I think there are multiple challenges around exactly how we do it. I think Gavin and I have talked about this on other occasions, that you know, there's a kind of matrix of different ship types, different ship sizes, doing different jobs around the world, and they have a whole plethora of different technical solutions, and the challenge is to try and match the right solutions to the right vessels. And we'll make mistakes along the way, of course we will. Humankind always does, but there's nothing better than a mistake for a good bit of learning.
Yeah, and I think actually, you know, what the program that Di's put together and the project that Di's working on with some leading companies there is a significant example of one of the ways of dealing with the issues in a more modular, in a more flexible way of actually looking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Diane, but looking at a ship more as a platform for various technologies, turning things on the head when it comes to, for example, the alternative fuels that are on the market. I think the industry, the big word in the industry at the moment is we're not sure, we're in transition, which is going to be the fuel of the future. And I think very much the message that I'm picking up is we're sitting on the fence. We're not completely sure. There are first movers in areas like LNG, but a lot of people in the industry are seeing that as potentially a transitional fuel, possibly with quite a short lifespan. And when we're looking at a vessel that has a fixed engine type or a fixed fuel type, that is a big challenge. So actually being able to, for example, adopt different wind propulsion technologies onto a vessel, having the opportunity to spin out a generator that's using diesel for a fuel cell in the coming years, without that being a tremendously expensive and technologically difficult process. So I think at least in the new build process, I think we'll see much more of this hybrid nature of development. And then in the retrofit market, I think one of the great things about wind propulsion, and of course I'm going to say this, but is that it reduces the amount that you have to bunker your vessel. So retrofit possibly 10 to 30% reductions, depending on rig size, ship type, and 50% plus for an optimized new build. Now, if you've only got, say, 80% or 70% of the alternative fuel challenge to actually deal with, you're future-proofing that vessel quite strongly, and also you're facilitating the uptake of potentially slightly more expensive or less energy-dense fuels. You're actually needing to bunker less. So that is an interesting change or development or adaptation that's going to be we will see in the market going forward. And I think on that alternative fuel aspect, as I said, of course we've had LNG, but we've had a lot of LNG ready vessels for quite a few years. Now there's an uptick in actual deliveries of those vessels. But now hydrogen, ammonia is coming onto the horizon as well as an option. The battery technology is improving dramatically. So we're actually looking at sectors. If we talk about shipping, obviously we're talking about a massive industry. But just as an example, in the ferry segment, short distance ferries can easily be done with the battery systems that we have today. So is there any need for us to have fossil fuel powered short haul ferries? No. I think the answer is clearly no. Will it be batteries? Will it be fuel cells? That's the debate that we have, the nicer debate that we have, depending on the region, depending on the availability of the supply of that power. And one last thing, Diane mentioned about offshore wind earlier on, and we actually have an industry that's producing huge amounts of energy, and it can't transmit all of it. We actually have to turn off a lot of those turbines when there's overconsumption. Turning that into bunker fuel, having vessels possibly even bunkering out at the offshore wind farms is another way of looking at this in a much more systematic, holistic way. Let's match offshore renewables, onshore renewables, and large vessels, matching those into a system that becomes a win-win situation for everybody. So, Di, on the alternative fuel side of things, how do you see the developments over the last 12 months?
So I think it's really hard for ship owners to figure out which way to go. And we can see with the sulfur issues that people are hanging on to try and get a steer, and I completely understand that. And just to build on something that Gavin talked about, which is that the net amount of propulsive power you need is reduced if you can install, retrofit primary renewable energy onto your asset. So what that means is that you might be able to save, I don't know, 25% fuel on an annual basis if you retrofit your existing vessel with wind. And I say that in 3 sentences, and it is one heck of a job. I mean, it isn't easy, and I'm not underplaying it, but I think what we need to be thinking about is the end game, which is that you would reduce your overall fuel consumption. So your problem of where you will bunker for your particular choice of alternative fuel is less. But I think what we're doing with the Smart Green Shipping Alliance is to think about how can we make our assets autonomous in fuel, and how can we secure the supply chain for our alternative fuel, whatever that might be, and then we have a commercial proposition because we have much more certainty in our operational costs. And that, I think, is the commercial aspects that we need to be thinking about. And going towards the future, we're thinking that we can have an alternative zero emission vessel which is autonomous. Now, that may not realize itself till 2050, but that's the journey that we're starting today. So I think that there are a lot of possibilities across the piece, and start the journey, really. That's my kind of takeaway.
Okay, Gavin, Diane, thank you very much. We're going to ask a couple of questions that have come in during the broadcast, if that's okay. Just a reminder to any of our listeners, if there are any questions that you would still like to submit, Gavin and Diane will be able to answer the questions after the broadcast, which will be made available for download. So one of the first questions I've got here for both of you, we spoke about viable alternative fuels in the market. But we've seen a lot of investment recently on the scrubber side of things, and we've seen kind of talk around LNG pick up quite considerably. But will things such as scrubbers, LNG, will that help in the decarbonisation process?
So my view is that I think it helps in so far as the industry becomes familiar and able to respond to policy in a positive way. So I think that the scrubber challenge is, or the sulfur challenge is significant, but you now see that the shipping sector, the shipping market is grappling with those problems and taking them seriously and finding solutions. And as they do that, in my experience with the ship owners that we talk to, they recognise that there's a challenge, and that there are multiple opportunities, and we start to think about it, and the need for low sulfur fuel is the first stage to looking for low carbon solutions. So I think it helps in the biggest challenge, which I think is a shift in mindset. I'm not a massive enthusiast for LNG because I think it's still a fossil fuel. It has some very worrying emissions from the kind of methane leaks that they're experienced in the supply chain. I think it's an expensive diversion, but I think the fact that we are prepared to, as an industry, start looking and thinking about how to change is incredibly positive.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Guy, that that we're seeing the market is signalling that that changes are required, and the industry is responding quite strongly now. And whether that is, or an alternative fossil fuel such as LNG, I think that's very bold, very expensive changes directed by policy changes, by market shifts, and by the concern over CO2, etc. That's a very positive situation. I would agree that I think we need to be much more careful around the total footprint of any fuel that is adopted. We hear that adage of well to wake, but it's incredibly important that we look at the total environmental footprint and also the costs involved, and be very clear that any fossil fuel development will always engender some government subsidies for R&D, for prospecting for those resources, for security, etc. Just as a point of fact, if we have hydrogen, that's readily available anywhere. At the moment, the vast majority is being cracked from fossil fuels, but in the future, that should be renewable energy. So we're actually talking about an abundant fuel source there that, if we can harness it properly, will be quite a game changer in that sense. And I think with scrubbers, of course, it makes total sense when you have the differential between HFO and MGO at the moment at around about $200+ per ton. That's a market signal saying scrubbers in the short to medium term are going to be have significant returns on your investment. Does it fix the CO2 problem? Of course it does. And I think there are quite some significant developments in things like carbon capture or reuse of the exhaust gases. That's potential that could be coming down the line in the next 3 to 5 years. I know Germany is quite strong on this type of technology. But again, I'd like to come back to something that Di said, is that matrix is, we've got different vessels operating in different ways in different markets. And I think that we've got to move away from this one-size-fits-all option. We've been very spoiled with fossil fuels. They've been a gift that unfortunately is going to keep on giving for quite a few years in the CO2 emissions and other impacts. But as the means of development, it's been incredibly powerful. Now we have run that course, and that will not be part of the future. So I think scrubbers, yes, they're part of the transition. Yes, they make complete financial sense in the short to medium term, but they don't help us get to the decarbonisation platform. And again, coming back to that, we have 12 years, we have a fixed carbon budget, and once that carbon budget is released into the atmosphere, after that, we will have to pay a significant and a truly significant amount of money for each additional ton of carbon that is released. And we have to be carbon neutral at that point. So every ton that the shipping industry releases has to be clawed back in some way in the rest of the economy. And that's going to be increasingly difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, just 30 seconds from each of you, if that's okay. You've touched upon kind of the financial aspects, and I suppose that at the end of the day, everyone has to maintain their bottom line. But just kind of a closing question, a closing thought, I think, going forward. How can shipping minimise the financial impact of decarbonisation? What are your thoughts about that? Gavin, if I could start with you.
Yeah, it's the $64,000 question. It's the one that makes everything else sustainable. You know, how does shipping do this? Well, I think we have to stop looking at our industry in the way that we always looked at it, which is we buy a huge asset from a bank, which is then depreciated over, say, 30 years, operating on a single fuel choice in the standard operation way under time charter, for example. I think that we have to start looking at this in a much more systematic way. Just for an example, many of my members now are starting to look at the leasing or the potential rental of wind units as opposed to a large capex expenditure. We would then be transferring the vast majority of that expense to OPEX. Now that changes the financial dynamic of the installation of a large piece of technology. Rolls-Royce does this with its aircraft engines. Then you're looking at maintenance, you're looking at a whole set of other services that come in. So I think, you know, if the industry is serious about change, and every indication is that they're deadly serious about this and looking for pathways to doing it in a financially secure and profitable way, then we start looking at different systems, different ways to finance it. And that actually releases a lot of other potential areas. You know, for example, new entrants coming into the shipping industry, you know, from the logistics chain. We often talk about shipping as an industry. We're one link in a very large logistics chain, and we're seeing pressure coming from our cargo owners. I say let's involve them in the decision-making process, in the financing of opportunities, and you know, changing that insular, siloed mindset will very much revolutionize the industry in a profitable way, where we all share the benefits of that transition and shoulder some of those costs as well. Guy,
yeah, I think my experience of working with finance and insurance is that what they are increasingly looking at is risk. And we saw the Bank of England today encouraging all financiers to consider put somebody on their board who was responsible for climate risk. It's the biggest risk of our era. Finance is always about mitigating risk. So I think what we will be able to reveal, what we'll be able to develop, are climate-related finance solutions. Everybody recognizes that we have to make money, we have to keep the markets moving, but we also have to address the biggest risk of our time, which is the impacts of climate change. So it's about risk management.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much to both Gavin and Diane for today. Decarbonisation is always one of those topics that it's a struggle to even answer one question in the time allocated. So thank you very much for useful insights for today. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view a recording of today's webinar. So if you found this event useful, please share it with your colleagues. We have also included the link to the Digital Week webinar series in the resource list widget. So please be sure to click on the link to register for other events in the series. And also, just as a reminder, any further questions that have come in, Gavin and Diane will be happy to answer those questions, and we will distribute it after the broadcast. Once you leave the event, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We'd appreciate it if you could share your feedback on this event, as it helps us to provide you with content most interesting to you. So Gavin and Diane, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for listening. And on behalf of Connect 365 Maritime, have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.